the shadowed hills of Nelgiri, a ruthless cheetah has turned a thriving tea plantation into a deserted land of fear. Every step you take could be your last. Join me as I face this man-eating predator alone in a battle of survival where instinct meets terror. Will I emerge victorious or become the next victim? Hey everyone, I'm Sharik, and welcome to ManEater Chronicles. Today, I'm taking you deep into the wild hills of Nilgiri, where a ruthless man-eating cheetah has terrorized an entire tea plantation. Join me as I face this deadly predator head-on in a battle of survival you won't believe. The journey to Nilgiri began in the bustling heat of Madras, where the plains stretched endlessly under a burning tropical sun. From there, a long railway journey of nearly 12 hours carried travelers across towns, rivers, and fields until the train finally reached the important southern city of Coimbatore. But Coimbatore was only the gateway. The real adventure began beyond it. From this city, a narrow mountain railway climbed slowly toward the mysterious hills of Nelgiri. Unlike the fast trains of the plains, this small mountain train moved deliberately, almost cautiously, as if it respected the ancient wilderness it was entering. The engine hissed and groaned as it pulled the coaches upward along sharp curves and steep gradients carved into the mountainside. As the train climbed higher, the world began to change. The scorching heat of the plains faded away, and a cool mountain breeze drifted through the windows. Dense forests appeared on both sides of the track, their dark green canopies whispering in the wind. Waterfalls glimmered briefly between rocks before disappearing behind the thick foliage. The train wound its way through tunnels cut into solid rock and crossed narrow bridges hanging above deep valleys. 4 hours passed in this breathtaking ascent. The higher the train climbed, the more silent and mysterious the Nilgiri Hills appeared. Rolling tea gardens spread across the slopes like endless green carpets, their perfectly trimmed bushes forming neat patterns across the mountains. Mist floated lazily over the hills, giving the entire region an almost dreamlike beauty. Yet beneath that beauty lay a strange and unsettling feeling. The forests surrounding the tea plantations were deep, ancient, and largely untouched by humans. Hidden within those dark woods were creatures that ruled the wilderness, silent predators that moved unseen between the trees. It was in these very hills of Nilgiri, beautiful yet dangerous, that a terrifying man-eating cheetah had begun to spread fear among the people. And unknowingly, I was about to step directly into its deadly territory. When the mountain train finally slowed to a halt at the quiet hill station of Kannur, the air felt completely different from the plains I had left behind. A cool mist drifted through the tall eucalyptus trees, and the distant hills of Nelgari stretched endlessly in layers of deep green. The place looked peaceful, almost too peaceful for a land that was soon to reveal a terrifying secret. Just beyond Kannur, hidden among the rolling slopes of the mountains, lay my friend's vast tea estate known as the Erakundu tea plantation. The plantation spread across the hills like a sea of perfectly trimmed tea bushes, their neat rows climbing the slopes in smooth patterns. From a distance, the entire landscape looked like a carefully painted picture, beautiful, calm, and untouched. I had come all the way from Bombay at the personal invitation of my old friend who owned the estate. His letter had been brief, but strangely urgent. He had insisted that I visit Nelgari as soon as possible, promising that the hills would offer both adventure and relaxation after the exhausting life of the city. I assumed he simply wanted company, or perhaps wished to show me the beauty of his plantation. At that moment, I had no idea that something far more serious was happening here. As I stood on the platform, looking at the mist-covered hills and the endless green plantations, the place seemed like a paradise hidden high in the mountains. Workers usually filled these gardens during the tea-picking season, their laughter echoing across the slopes as they moved between the bushes collecting fresh leaves. But beneath the calm beauty of Nelgari, fear had already begun to spread. Deep in the forests surrounding the plantation, a cunning predator had entered the region, an animal powerful enough to silence entire gardens and terrify hardened workers. And although I did not yet know it, my arrival in Nelgari would soon pull me into a deadly hunt that would test every skill I possessed as a hunter. Fate, however, had arranged a strange and unfortunate twist for my arrival in the Nilgiri Hills. On the very day I reached Kunur, my friend, the owner of the Erakundu tea plantation, was suddenly forced to leave. A legal matter involving his mother had demanded his immediate presence in Ooty, the administrative center of the hills. The situation, he told me, could not be delayed. Courts rarely waited for anyone, and he had no choice but to leave at once. When we met briefly that afternoon, he insisted that I accompany him to Ooty. His tone carried a hint of urgency, though at the time I did not fully understand why. He suggested that we could discuss everything there in comfort, away from the quiet isolation of the plantation. But the long journey from Bombay to the Nilgiri Hills had drained every ounce of energy from my body. 12 hours on the train to Coimbatore and another exhausting climb through the mountains had left me completely worn out. The thought of immediately continuing another journey, even a short one, felt unbearable. So I refused. Instead of traveling further into the hills, I decided to remain behind in Kunur. The Erakundu bungalow was far too isolated for someone arriving alone, and my friend himself advised against staying there until he returned. Taking his advice, I chose to stay at the comfortable Dales Hotel, a quiet colonial building overlooking the mist-covered valleys. My friend departed for Ooty that very afternoon, promising he would return within a few days. At the time, I believed I had made the sensible choice, resting comfortably in a peaceful hill station rather than wandering through lonely plantations. What I did not realize was that my friend had wanted me there for a very specific reason. Somewhere in the forests surrounding his tea estate, a deadly predator had begun to terrorize the workers, and in his absence, fate had quietly placed the responsibility of facing that danger upon me. After my friend left for Ooty, an unusual silence settled around me. The long journey from Bombay had exhausted my body, and the cool mountain air of Kunur made the quiet room at Dale's Hotel feel even more inviting. It was a large colonial building, standing proudly on a ridge that overlooked the deep valleys and endless tea gardens of the Nilgiri Hills. Once inside my room, I locked the door, pulled the curtains aside, and allowed the soft mountain breeze to drift through the open window. Outside, the hills were wrapped in a thin blanket of mist, and the distant forests looked dark and mysterious. Despite the beauty of the view, my tired mind could think of nothing except sleep. I lay down on the bed, still wearing my travel clothes, and within minutes the exhaustion of the journey overwhelmed me. For hours I slept deeply, the kind of heavy sleep that only comes after long and difficult travel. The peaceful silence of the hills surrounded the hotel, broken only by the occasional whistle of the mountain wind. When I finally awoke, the day had already begun to fade. The golden sunlight of the afternoon had turned into the long shadows of evening. The sky outside the window had grown dim, and the cool air carried the faint smell of damp earth and forest leaves. I washed my face, changed my clothes, and stepped out toward the hotel's long veranda that overlooked the valley. The hills of Nelgari were slowly sinking into twilight. A strange stillness hung over the land, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. At that moment, everything appeared calm and peaceful. But hidden somewhere beyond those silent hills and shadowy forests, a deadly predator was already moving through the darkness, watching, waiting, and choosing its next victim. As evening settled over the quiet hills of Kunor, I stepped out onto the long veranda of Dale's hotel, enjoying the cool mountain air. The fading sunlight painted the Nilgiri Hills in deep shades of gold and purple, and for a moment, the entire landscape looked calm and peaceful. It was difficult to imagine that anything dangerous could exist in such a beautiful place. When I returned toward my room, I noticed the hotel servant, a thin, middle-aged man named Kasim, busily cleaning inside. He had already finished sweeping the floor and was dusting the furniture with slow, careful movements. As I entered, his eyes suddenly fixed on something leaning against the wall. It was my rifle. Like many men in the hills, Kasim seemed both curious and cautious about firearms. He picked up the rifle carefully, holding it with respect as he wiped the barrel with a cloth. Then he stepped outside the room, still holding the weapon, and looked at me with wide eyes. In broken, hesitant English mixed with local words, he spoke. "Sab, very good gun. Strong gun." I smiled slightly and nodded, thinking he was simply admiring the weapon. But then his expression changed. He turned his head slowly and pointed toward the dark hills behind the hotel. "Sab, jungle there. Bad cheetah come." His voice dropped to a whisper. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him, but Kasim quickly continued, explaining in fragments of words and gestures that a dangerous cheetah had recently appeared in the forests near the tea plantations. The animal had been seen moving through the gardens, frightening the workers and causing great panic among the people of the area. The peaceful hills I had admired only moments before suddenly seemed different, because somewhere in those silent forests, a cunning predator was already stalking the land, and the fear it had created was slowly spreading through every plantation in Nelgari. Kasim's warning was not the frightened imagination of a nervous servant. As he continued speaking in his broken, uneasy English, the full seriousness of the situation slowly began to unfold before me. Pointing again toward the dark hills behind the hotel, he explained that the animal had first appeared near the tea gardens of Erakundu Plantation. At the beginning, people believed it was simply passing through the forest like many wild animals did, but soon it became clear that this cheetah was different. It had begun entering the tea gardens. During the tea picking season, hundreds of workers, mostly young women, usually filled the slopes of the plantations. They moved between the rows of tea bushes from morning until evening, laughing, talking, and filling their baskets with fresh green leaves. The hills were normally alive with their voices. But now, those gardens had fallen silent. According to Kasim, the cheetah had been seen more than once moving between the bushes where the workers were picking tea. At first, it kept its distance, watching from the edges of the forest, but its boldness increased day by day. The animal had begun appearing closer and closer to the workers, moving silently among the rows of bushes like a shadow.
Panic spread quickly through the plantation. The young women who worked in the gardens refused to return to the fields. The male laborers were no less frightened. Even the strongest among them feared the cunning nature of a hunting predator that could strike without warning. Within days, entire sections of the plantation were abandoned. Tea bushes that should have been filled with workers stood empty under the silent sky. The harvest season, the most important time for the plantation, had come to a sudden halt. And as Kasim finished his story, I began to understand something unsettling. This was not simply a wild animal passing through the forest. Somewhere in the Nilgiri Hills, a bold and dangerous predator had begun claiming the land as its hunting ground.
As Kasim finished describing the terror spreading through the tea gardens, a sudden realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. For several moments I remained silent, slowly piecing together the events that had brought me to the Nilgiri Hills. My friend's urgent invitation, his insistence that I travel all the way from Bombay, and the strange urgency in his voice when we met at Coonoor. Now it all began to make sense. He had not invited me merely for leisure or companionship. My friend knew very well that I was an experienced hunter. Over the years, I had faced many dangerous animals in the forests of India, and he was fully aware of my skill with a rifle. It suddenly became clear that he had called me here for a very specific reason: the cheetah. The fear gripping the Erakundu tea plantation was not just a small disturbance, it was a disaster for the entire estate. The tea harvest had stopped, workers were fleeing the area, and the once thriving gardens had fallen silent. If the predator continued roaming freely, the plantation could suffer enormous losses. My friend must have hoped that I would arrive, learn about the situation, and agree to track down the animal before the damage became worse. But fate had intervened. Because of the sudden legal matter involving his mother, he had been forced to leave for Ooty before he could explain anything to me. Perhaps he had planned to tell me everything once we reached the plantation together. Instead, he left me behind in Coonoor, assuming he would return in a few days to discuss the matter properly. He probably believed the cheetah would remain hidden in the forest until then. Yet, as I stood there in the quiet room of Dale's hotel, I realized something important. The hunt he had intended to arrange in a few days might begin much sooner than anyone expected. Because I was already here, and the Nelgari jungle was not far away. The moment of realization settled over me like a cold shadow. I understood then that my presence in Nelgari was not a coincidence. It was fate calling me to face a predator that had already thrown the plantation into chaos. A surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins, shaking off the last remnants of travel fatigue. There would be no delay. The cheetah could not be allowed to continue its reign of terror. I moved quickly to prepare. First, I checked my rifle, running my fingers carefully along its smooth barrel, ensuring it was clean and ready. Every mechanical click and tightening of screws echoed in the quiet hotel room, a small but powerful ritual that reminded me of the responsibility I carried. I strapped the rifle across my back, feeling the weight settle against my shoulders. Next came the hunting knife, my trusted companion in close encounters. I secured it firmly to my belt, testing the balance and grip with practiced movements. Every tool, every weapon had to be in perfect condition. This would be no ordinary hunt. In the wild, one mistake could mean the difference between life and death. Finally, I surveyed the rest of my gear. I packed a small bag with essentials, water, a few rations, and a simple first aid kit. Every item had to be light, every step deliberate. The forest I was about to enter was dense, dark, and unforgiving. Mist and shadows would hide the predator, and every sound could signal either prey or peril.
By the time I was ready, the afternoon had faded into the muted light of evening. The hills of Nelgari stretched before me, shrouded in mist and mystery, their slopes whispering of the danger hidden within. I took a deep breath, letting the cool mountain air fill my lungs. The moment of decision had arrived. I would leave the relative safety of Dale's hotel and step into the heart of the plantation, into the hunting grounds of the most cunning and deadly predator I had ever heard of, a cheetah that had already claimed fear as its ally. Every instinct in me sharpened. The hunt for Nilgiri's ManEater was about to begin. With my rifle strapped across my back and the hunting knife secured at my side, I left the relative safety of Dale's hotel and set out on the rugged path toward Erakundu tea plantation. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the rolling hills of Nilgiri, casting long shadows over the mist-shrouded valleys. Every step I took on the narrow mountain path felt deliberate, measured, as though the hills themselves were observing me, waiting to test my resolve. The road twisted through dense forests, and the earthy smell of damp soil and fallen leaves filled the air. Each bend revealed new vistas, endless rows of emerald tea bushes clinging to steep slopes, narrow streams cutting through the plantations, and distant waterfalls glimmering faintly through the thickening mist. But beauty here was deceptive. Hidden in these hills was a predator whose silent presence had already driven workers from their posts and emptied entire plantations. As I moved further along the path, my senses heightened. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig underfoot seemed amplified. The wind carried strange scents, smoky from distant fires, earthy from the damp forest floor, and faintly metallic, like the predator's domain brushing against my awareness. I could feel the cheetah's influence in the trembling silence that hung over the plantations, the absence of the workers' chatter, the empty baskets lying abandoned among the tea bushes. After more than an hour and a half of careful walking, I reached the outskirts of Erakundu. The plantation spread out before me like a green ocean, perfectly ordered, yet eerily still. Normally alive with voices and movement, the gardens now lay deserted, as if the hills themselves were holding their breath. I stopped for a moment, surveying the scene. Somewhere in these shadowed gardens and bordering forests, the man-eating cheetah lurked, silent, patient, and deadly. And I, a lone hunter entering its realm, would have to rely on every skill, every instinct, every ounce of courage I possessed. The hunt had begun. Every step forward drew me closer to a predator as cunning as the hills themselves. As I stepped into the outskirts of Erakundu tea plantation, the reality of the predator's audacity became chillingly clear. The tea gardens, which should have been alive with workers' voices, baskets clinking, and laughter ringing across the slopes, were silent. Each row of perfectly trimmed bushes stood deserted, shadows stretching long across the empty paths. The silence itself was heavy, almost oppressive, a silence that spoke of fear, of something unseen yet terrifyingly real. I met the plantation manager, a tall, stern man who had been tirelessly trying to keep some semblance of order in the estate. He welcomed me politely, but the tension in his face betrayed the desperation that had gripped the workers. Without waiting for preliminaries, he began recounting the events of the past weeks, the daring strikes of the cheetah, its precise, almost calculated approach to terrorizing the plantation. According to him, the cheetah had first appeared near a small hillock overlooking the tea gardens. A group of 50 women, busy plucking tea leaves, had suddenly seen it descending from the forest edge. Panic spread instantly. Screams echoed across the slopes, sending the women fleeing for their lives. Even the male laborers, strong and hardened, were paralyzed with fear. In one instance, a brave young worker had hurled a tool toward the predator. By sheer luck, it struck the cheetah's face, causing it to retreat into the shadows. Yet even after such encounters, the animal did not flee permanently. It returned with patience, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. The plantation manager emphasized that the fear was absolute. Sections of the plantation were abandoned entirely, and the harvest had come to a standstill. Every worker now moved in groups, armed with tools, constantly alert, yet terrified of the predator that had become a master of stealth and strategy. Standing there, surveying the empty gardens and listening to the manager's words, I realized the task ahead was greater than a simple hunt. This was no ordinary animal. The cheetah had claimed dominion over the plantation, and entering its territory meant confronting both its cunning and its lethal strength. The first vivid accounts of the cheetah's boldness had already set my nerves on edge, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of encountering this predator in its own domain. As I moved deeper into the plantation, the rows of tea bushes rose like green walls around me, hiding shadows and secrets within their dense foliage. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and mist, carrying faint whispers of movement that made my senses tingle with anticipation. The manager guided me to a small hillock overlooking a section of the plantation. From there, he pointed to the exact spot where the cheetah had first descended. I could still see the flattened tea bushes where the women had once worked, empty baskets strewn across the paths, and trampled leaves indicating the frantic flight of terrified workers. The silence was unnatural, almost oppressive. He described in detail how the predator had advanced, step by silent step, approaching the workers with calculated precision. It was not reckless. It did not charge blindly. The cheetah observed, waited, and struck only when the moment was perfect. Its presence alone was enough to freeze the strongest hearts with fear. At that moment, I felt a shiver run down my spine. I understood why my friend had insisted I come here. This was no ordinary hunt. This was a battle of wits and courage against a predator that had already learned to dominate its territory. The manager paused, his eyes scanning the distant tree line. "He moves like a shadow," he said, voice low. "You may not see it at first, but you will feel it. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, it will be watching." I tightened my grip on my rifle and adjusted the knife at my belt. The weight of the tools in my hands was reassuring, yet the thought of the predator hidden somewhere in the tea gardens filled me with both dread and resolve. I realized then that this encounter would define the limits of my skill and courage. The cheetah was patient, cunning, and deadly, and it had already claimed the first victory through fear.
No amount of preparation or vigilance could fully convey the terror of witnessing the cheetah's audacity firsthand. A few days after my arrival, news reached the plantation of yet another shocking encounter. This time, the victim was a lone postman carrying a large sack of cash across the winding paths from Erakundu to the neighboring slopes. The postman, unaware of the predator's presence, had pedaled his bicycle steadily, the rhythmic turning of the pedals echoing faintly through the misty hills. As he approached a steep incline near a bend in the plantation, the cheetah struck. Silent, swift, and lethal, the predator had been lying in wait among the thick bushes that lined the path. It moved like a shadow, gliding across the terrain with uncanny precision. In an instant, the postman felt a heavy, sharp pressure on his back, a prelude to imminent death.
The bicycle lurched forward uncontrollably, careening down the slope. The postman's heart raced as he desperately tried to pedal and regain balance. He barely escaped the predator's claws by mere inches. Had the bicycle fallen even slightly differently, he would have been crushed or caught directly in the cheetah's strike. His body was bruised and battered, yet he survived. This attack sent ripples of panic throughout the plantation. Workers and locals alike realized that the predator was no longer content to merely terrify from a distance. It had become bold, striking at humans with calculated precision. The tea gardens, already deserted in parts, grew even quieter. Standing there, I listened to the postman's trembling recounting of the encounter, feeling a cold knot of resolve tighten in my chest. This was no ordinary hunt, no casual pursuit of an animal. The cheetah had become a master of stealth, patience, and deadly cunning. From that moment, the stakes were clear. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and this predator would not hesitate to make its strike final. The hunt would not be for sport. It would be a fight for survival.
The day after the postman's near-tragic encounter, the full extent of the cheetah's control over the plantation became undeniable. Sections of Erakundu tea plantation that once buzzed with life now lay utterly deserted. The air was heavy with silence, a suffocating quiet that pressed down on the hills like a physical weight. Rows of tea bushes stood abandoned, their leaves untouched, the paths between them littered with empty baskets and discarded tools. The workers had fled. The young women who once moved confidently through the slopes now huddled together in fear, staying close to the safety of their small cottages. Even the strongest male laborers who had faced storms and wild animals before dared not venture into the fields alone. Every step outside their shelters was a potential death sentence. The plantation manager, normally a composed and stoic figure, confessed to me that only a handful of loyal staff remained. They stayed near the bungalow, armed with tools and sticks, moving in small groups and constantly scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of movement. The cheetah had not only killed fearlessly, but had transformed fear into a weapon of its own. Its presence alone was enough to empty entire sections of the estate, halting the tea harvest completely. Standing amidst the deserted gardens, I felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on my shoulders. The cheetah had claimed dominion here. It was not merely hunting for sustenance, it was establishing control, asserting dominance over every slope, every pathway, every shadowed corner of the plantation. The silence of Erakundu was deafening. It was a reminder of what I faced. A predator patient enough to watch, cunning enough to strike when least expected, and ruthless enough to terrify an entire community. I tightened my grip on my rifle and adjusted my knife at my belt. The fight was no longer just a challenge. It had become a battle against fear itself, a test of courage, skill, and endurance in the heart of Nelgari. By the fourth day of my stay, I understood that to confront the cheetah, I could no longer remain on the safety of the plantation paths or behind the protective walls of the bungalow. The predator had claimed the hills and forests as its own, and any attempt to hunt it required stepping directly into its domain, a realm of shadows, mist, and deadly silence. I left the bungalow at first light, moving quietly along the narrow trails that threaded between the tea bushes. The cool morning air of Nelgari brushed against my face, carrying with it the earthy scent of damp soil and fallen leaves.
Every rustle of foliage, every snap of a twig underfoot made my heart quicken. I knew the cheetah could be anywhere, watching, calculating, waiting for a moment of weakness. As I approached the base of the hillock where it had first appeared, I slowed my pace. The plantation ended and the dense forest began. The trees grew taller and closer together, their thick canopies cutting out the morning sun. Shadows pooled at the roots, and mist clung to the undergrowth, creating a natural camouflage perfect for a predator. Every instinct told me to stay alert, to move with patience and precision, for this was no ordinary hunt. I crouched behind a cluster of bushes and scanned the forest ahead. The stillness was almost unnatural, as if the entire jungle held its breath. In the distance, the faint crack of a branch suggested movement, but it was impossible to tell whether it was a deer, a monkey, or the cheetah itself. Every step into the forest was a step deeper into danger. The predator's territory was now mine to enter, and the hills of Nelgari whispered warnings with every gust of wind and every shadow that shifted among the trees. I tightened my grip on my rifle, adjusted the knife at my belt, and took a steadying breath. Today, I would no longer observe the predator from a distance. Today, I would enter the heart of its dominion and face the ManEater of Nelgari directly. As I advanced deeper into the forest surrounding Erakundu Plantation, the atmosphere shifted from serene to tense. The distant mountains, once bathed in sunlight, were now cloaked in mist and shadow. Every step through the undergrowth was deliberate. The soft crunch of leaves underfoot could betray my presence as easily as reveal that of the predator I sought. It did not take long for the first signs to appear. Flattened grass, clawed trees, and the faint metallic tang of blood in the air told a story of the cheetah's boldness. These were not the simple marks of a passing wild animal. They were deliberate signs, warnings etched into the forest floor and trees by a predator confident in its territory. The tracks led toward a dense thicket near a small hidden pond where water collected from the hills above. I crouched low, scanning every shadow, every shifting leaf. The cheetah moved silently, with the kind of precision that only apex predators possess. Its footprints were light but unmistakable, the spacing deliberate, each step a calculated assertion of control. Even without seeing the animal, I could feel its presence. The forest seemed alive with the tension it carried, every bird call, every rustle of the wind magnified by fear. A sudden rustle in the trees ahead made my pulse race. Branches shook slightly, and small monkeys scattered in panicked leaps, disappearing into the fog. The predator was nearby. I could sense it stalking the forest floor beneath the shadows, its golden eyes invisible but ever present in my imagination. I steadied my rifle and adjusted my knife, knowing that this moment was the threshold between observation and confrontation. Every instinct, every muscle in my body was alert. I was no longer simply walking through the forest. I had entered the hunting ground of a creature that had already mastered fear, silence, and death. The cheetah was close. It was watching, and it was ready to strike.
The forest held its breath as I moved cautiously, each step measured, each sound muted against the carpet of fallen leaves. The mist clung to the trees, wrapping the forest in a ghostly shroud, and the sun struggled to pierce through the dense canopy above. Every instinct in me screamed that the predator was near, and soon the forest revealed the proof of my fears. A sudden movement caught my eye, a shimmer of gold slipping between the shadows of the tea bushes near the thicket. I froze. The cheetah emerged with silent grace, its sleek, muscular body blending perfectly with the dappled light of the forest floor. Every step was deliberate, precise, a display of power and control that sent a shiver down my spine. Its piercing eyes scanned the area, unafraid, unyielding, aware of my presence, but utterly confident in its dominion. This was no ordinary wild animal. The cheetah was a living embodiment of stealth and lethality. Its long, rippling muscles coiled like springs beneath its spotted coat, and its sharp claws barely brushed the ground as it moved. The tail flicked with measured precision, balancing its every movement, while its ears twitched at the faintest hint of sound. I felt the weight of the moment press against my chest. Here, in the heart of Nelgiri, I faced a predator that had already mastered fear itself. Every rustle of leaves, every trembling branch was a testament to its control. The deserted tea gardens, the panicked workers, the abandoned baskets, all spoke of its reign. Rifle in hand, knife ready at my side, I realized the enormity of what lay ahead. The predator was no longer a story told by fearful villagers or trembling workers. It was real, alive, and standing only yards away, its golden eyes locked onto the forest around it, waiting. The hunt had reached its critical point. The cheetah was revealed, and now the battle between hunter and man-eater would truly begin. The forest seemed to vanish around me. Time slowed, and every sound, the whisper of the wind, the distant rustle of leaves, even my own heartbeat, echoed like a drum in the heavy stillness. There, before me, stood the Nelgari cheetah, a predator honed by the wild, muscles coiled, eyes locked with mine. It did not roar or growl. It did not move aggressively. It merely watched. The silence between us was charged with lethal tension, a standoff where the slightest misstep could tip the balance toward death. The cheetah's gaze was unwavering, intelligent, calculating. It measured me as I measured it, analyzing my stance, my grip on the rifle, my weight on the uneven forest floor. I could see the slight twitch of its tail, the flex of its legs, ready to spring in an instant. Every instinct screamed caution, yet I could feel my own resolve hardening. This confrontation demanded not just skill, but nerves of steel. I lowered my rifle slightly, testing its reaction. The cheetah did not flinch. It was patient, waiting for me to make the first move, but it also respected my presence, the awareness of a capable hunter. Its territory, its fear, and its dominance were absolute, yet it seemed to understand the rules of engagement, the silent agreement between apex predator and skilled pursuer. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, careful to remain balanced and silent. The cheetah mirrored me subtly, shifting its weight, ready to pounce, yet restrained. The forest itself held its breath. Birds paused mid-flight, leaves hung suspended in the mist, and every shadow seemed to lean in closer. This was no ordinary hunt. It was a battle of wits, courage, and patience. The predator had revealed itself fully, and now the true test began. One false move, one hesitation, and the cheetah would strike with lethal precision. I was alone, and the silent standoff had begun. The moment stretched like an eternity. The Nelgari cheetah's eyes remained locked on mine, calculating, poised, every muscle in its body taut with lethal potential. I could feel the tension in the air, electric and suffocating, as though the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Time slowed. Each heartbeat echoed like a drum in the silence. Without warning, the cheetah moved. Not a rush, not a charge. It was a lethal leap,
silent yet impossibly fast, covering the few yards between us in the blink of an eye. Its claws reached for me, sharp as blades, its powerful shoulders propelling the deadly force of its body toward mine. The air seemed to shiver with its approach, the shadows around us quivering as if acknowledging the raw power of the predator. I reacted instinctively. The rifle in my hands felt heavier, yet perfectly balanced. I aimed, heart hammering, eyes narrowing, and fired. The sharp report cracked through the stillness, startling birds into frantic flight. The cheetah's leap faltered, a grunt of surprise escaping it, and it landed heavily to the side, twisting with incredible agility to regain balance. My knife, strapped at my side, became my immediate companion as I prepared for the inevitable follow-up. The predator was relentless. It circled, crouching low, eyes gleaming with the intensity of a hunter who had never known defeat. Every step it took was precise, deliberate, calculating, and filled with raw energy. I could feel the force of its gaze, the weight of its presence, a mixture of elegance and pure lethal intent. This was no longer a simple confrontation. It had become a battle of survival, a test of skill, courage, and sheer willpower. The Nelgari cheetah had struck, and the forest itself seemed alive with the echo of that attack. The fight for life had begun in earnest, and there would be no mercy, no retreat, only predator and hunter, locked in a deadly dance of strength and survival. The forest erupted into chaos in the blink of an eye. The Nelgari cheetah, undeterred by my gunshot, lunged again, its body a blur of sinew and power. I felt the ground shudder beneath its strike as it slammed against me, claws raking, teeth snapping inches from my flesh. Every instinct screamed survival, every muscle tensed to meet the predator's deadly assault. The fight became immediate and brutal. I drove my hunting knife into the cheetah's side, twisting with all my strength as it recoiled, its growl a chilling mixture of pain and fury. The predator was relentless. Its body was a machine of predatory perfection, strong, agile, and terrifyingly fast. Even as it struck, I could feel the precision of its attacks, calculated and merciless, each movement designed to overpower, each motion a potential death sentence. Time slowed, compressed into moments of raw instinct. I could feel every strike, every swipe of its paw, every breath it drew like a storm pounding against my senses. I had never faced such a combination of cunning, strength, and speed. This was no ordinary hunt. This was survival, a battle that tested the limits of human endurance and courage. Blows landed, counterattacks followed, and the forest became a theater of chaos and fear. My grip on the rifle wavered, my knife slick with sweat and blood, yet I remained focused, every nerve alive with the need to survive. The predator's golden eyes were fixed on me, intelligent and merciless, calculating my next move even as I anticipated its attacks. Finally, after a heart-stopping struggle, I struck with precision, my knife finding its mark deep within the cheetah's body. The animal let out a final thunderous cry and collapsed. The forest fell silent once more, broken only by my ragged breathing. I stood there, bloodied but alive, victorious, but the encounter had left no illusions. In Nelgari, survival demanded courage, skill, and unflinching resolve. I had faced death itself and endured. The forest, once alive with tension and terror, now lay in an uneasy silence. The Nelgari cheetah, the predator that had ruled the tea gardens with fear, lay defeated at my feet. Every muscle in my body throbbed from the clash, the adrenaline slowly giving way to exhaustion. My clothes were torn, my hands bloodied, and yet a profound sense of accomplishment surged through me. This was more than a victory over a wild beast. It was a triumph over fear itself. As I looked around, the devastation the cheetah had wrought became painfully clear. Abandoned baskets, empty paths, and silent tea bushes bore witness to the terror it had inflicted. The plantation that once thrived now felt like a haunted realm. Yet with the predator gone, hope began to seep back into the land. Workers could return, the harvest could resume. Life, fragile but resilient, would reclaim its rhythm. I took a deep breath and allowed myself a moment to reflect. The Nelgari cheetah had not been a mindless killer. It had been a force of nature, intelligent, patient, and fierce. It had tested every skill, every instinct I possessed, pushing me to the absolute limits of endurance and courage. I had met its challenge, and through focus, strategy, and sheer willpower, I had prevailed. The forest seemed to exhale along with me. Birds cautiously returned to the treetops, and the rustle of small animals began to echo through the misty undergrowth. Life was returning, cautious but determined. I stood tall, rifle in hand, knife at my side, feeling the weight of what had transpired. Nelgari had tested me in every conceivable way, and I had survived. The hunt was over, but the lessons endured. Courage in the face of fear, patience in the face of danger, and the unshakable resolve to confront the unknown. In the heart of the wild, victory is never merely conquest, it is the affirmation of survival. And in Nelgari, I had survived. Wow, what an intense encounter that was. Facing the Nelgari man-eating cheetah was unlike anything I've ever experienced. The forest, the fear, the fight. It's a reminder of just how unpredictable and dangerous the wild can be. But we made it through together, and I'm grateful to share this story with all of you on ManEater Chronicles. If you enjoyed this adventure and want to see more real-life encounters with deadly predators, make sure to support the channel. Your likes, shares, and comments help me continue bringing these thrilling stories straight from the wild to you. Every interaction keeps the hunt alive and helps others witness the untamed world safely through our eyes. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join the ManEater Chronicles family. Also, comment below. If you were in Nelgari, would you have faced the cheetah like I did? Let me know your thoughts. I read every comment.